Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of The Period Party. We are here, myself and Nat, with Jen Racioppi. She is a women's health coach and the founder of the Lunar Logic Revolution, a movement for the modern woman so that she can achieve her dreams in complete alignment with the fullest expression of herself. It's very exciting. Hi, Jen.
Hi.
Hi. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Nat.
Hello.
I never know who to say hi to first. so many people to say hi to, and so many things to say.
I know, there really is. But probably should say hi to the guest first, though, because, you know, it's a given. Well, you would hope that it's a given.
Yeah, right?
Either of us are going to be here.
No kidding. I know, it's a nice welcome. Anyways, let's introduce Jen. So everyone, just so you know, Jen is a sought-after astrologer and also a Duke Integrative Medicine certified health coach. Her methodology helps women access their voice, make sense of their emotions, own their feminine power, and create a foundation of strength and fortitude as they move towards business success, financial empowerment, thriving relationships, and their most significant life goals. That is quite impressive. And on this episode, we're talking all about how women are connected to their lunar cycles, why we need to couple science with spirituality to fully heal, what is the Lunar Logic Revolution and why is this movement really important, and then what does mind-body connection actually mean, along with how you can create healing rituals in your life. I'm so thrilled because, Jen, you've been an integral part of my healing around so many things, and you've been an astrologer advisor to me as well. So I'm excited to share you with the world because I feel like you have lots of wisdom to go around.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's true. So tell us, so why don't we start with this? How are women connected to their lunar cycles?
Beautiful question. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and hello to all the women out there listening. It's such an honor to be here. You know, how are women connected to lunar cycles? Well, you know, our menstrual cycle, dubbed as the moon cycle, as you know, I'm sure all your listeners know because they tune into the Period Party, is a cycle that comes in multiple phases. And if we're diligent with our bodies and diligent with our cycles, hopefully it's like clockwork, and it's something we can rely on, almost like we can rely on gravity to keep us on the planet. And when we talk about gravity, we're really talking about the role that the moon plays on planet Earth. So planet Earth, the moon, the sun, actually the whole solar system, are constantly doing a dance in orbit with one another. And the moon cycle and the Earth cycle sync to such a degree that there's really 8 phases to the lunar cycle, but for purposes of today, we'll just talk about 4. And it's actually really synonymous with the woman's menstrual cycle in that it has the beginning, which is the new moon, and or in the woman's menstrual cycle, the period, which is a moment that's almost a lull. It's when the new moon is when there's no moon in the sky. And so it's a dark night. We can see the stars, and it's the very beginning of the lunar cycle. And as the moon begins to wax, it moves towards becoming full. And so it waxes until it's at a quarter, or some people call it a half moon, when we can see half the moon in the sky. And similar to the week after a woman's period, when she's in the follicular phase, it's a building up, a ramping up towards a peak or a climax where there's an increase of energy in the woman's life. And also simultaneously on planet Earth, when we're in the waning moon phase, we're building towards a full moon. So there's a build, right? And so that's moving into a peak full expression of the moon receiving the sunlight. And thus we really only see half of a moon ever, but we call it a full moon because we see the entire circumference of the moon. And so the moon's receiving the light of the sun, which is then it's reflecting it back to us, and we see the entire circumference of the moon in the sky, and that's known as the full moon. And full moons are very energetically charged. As we know, the moons control the tides on the planet, and so if the moons control the tides on the planet and our bodies are so largely made of water, it also has an impact on us as humans and really the entire ecosystem. So full moons are a time of celebration. They're a time of culmination. They can also be a time of just really peak energy, good or bad. And similar, the ovulation phase of a woman's cycle is very much mirrored by the full moon. It's a peak moment. Hormones are at a very almost climactic phase where the egg's able to release, and then the biological things that go along with ovulation kick in. And so the full moon and ovulation have this beautiful metaphor, and if you cycle with the phases of the moon and you have ovulation with the full moon, it's really a time of energy as well as maybe even a little bit of competitiveness. And like all things, the only constant is change, and the cycle continues. The moon stays full. I would give it like 3 full days really to feel the energy of the full moon. Of course, it perfects at a perfect minute, down to the minute, but I would give it a 2 to 3 day window to really, work with the full moon energy. And then the moon begins to wane, which means that it starts to receive less of the sun's light and thus reflects less of it back to the earth. And so the waning phase then becomes very similar to the luteal phase in that it's a time of release and the portion of the cycle that's making its way back to new again. So the peak or the climax has subsided, and now we're losing or shedding or preparing for there to be a dark moon or another menses where the cycle refreshes itself. So during the waning phase of the moon, it's like really a time to be letting go, releasing, surrendering. And if we link that up with the luteal phase, which is really, in my opinion, so powerful for hearing and receiving psychic, intuitive messages on how we should be living our lives more in alignment with our soul, organizing and situating ourselves in our homes and our career and getting things really impeccable for ourselves, dreaming, sleeping, nurturing, taking care of ourselves, eating really healthy so that our bodies are resilient as it goes through the changes, so that as we integrate into the next phase of our life, we're really in tune with our truth, our wisdom. We've said no to what we need to let go of. We've maybe, clutter cleared our home or organized our car or done something physically in the world to reflect the purity of mind that we're coming back to. And we've dealt with the emotions that come with wane. When things wane and we lose things, it can feel like a loss. So in the days before a new moon, it's very common to feel like, oh, man, things feel off or slow, or I don't feel that great. And similar to at times in the menstrual cycle, right before the menses begins or the next bleed begins, it's common to have feelings of melancholy or something come up that's worthy of reflection. And so when we live in sync with these cycles, we're cultivating wisdom and really momentum in our lives that brings us into higher states of being, more resilience, more well-being, and clarity. So I just think that there's a beautiful metaphor between the moon and the menstrual cycle that women are naturally tapped into, but it goes way deeper than that too because of how we process light. And, historically women have been really keyed into the moon, particularly in times when there was no electricity, and so the moonlight really regulated light in general, and that, of course, had an impact on hormonal systems.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think it's so important for women to be able to understand that because so often we fight against it. We're like, why do I feel like this? Why am I so tired? And I just got stuff to do. And I try and encourage my patients in the clinic to be really aware, especially during that phase, just before the period is about to arrive, to try and not schedule things in that require a lot of effort and how much easier life becomes when we're not working against the natural cycles and the natural rhythms of our body.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you've been able to talk through that. I have a question that perhaps I tend to ask this to everyone that talks about lunar cycles, don't I, Nickers? But I'm keen to ask you about the time of lunar return and what your understanding of that is because, I had a patient just this week. She messaged and she said, "Oh, love your methods and that, but whoopsies, we follow, natural fertility awareness, and we fell pregnant, and obviously that doesn't work." And I'm like, yeah, well, there could be other times that we ovulate. So, Can you share any information on that?
You mean when the moon returns to the place it was in the sky, or the same degree in the sky that it was when you were born? Is that what you mean? That's what as an astrologer I refer to as a lunar return. Oh, lunar returns are amazing. So there's a ton to do with lunar returns for ovulation and fertility because, actually one of the most common, I'm just going to backstep and then answer your question, so bear with me for a moment. One of the most common questions I get from women is, what if my cycle doesn't sync up with the phases of the moon? How do I sync my cycle with the phases of the moon? And, of course, I tell them, it's about regulating light and spending time outdoors. But then, the real thing is like, where was the moon when you were born? Were you born on a full moon? Were you born on a new moon? Because that's almost more important than syncing up with the overall cycle of the moon. And so where the moon was...
I love that.
Yeah, so where the moon was the moment you were born, it goes back to that same place every single month. And when the moon goes back to that same place, to the same degree, to the same sign, to the same position, and the same relationship to the sun as it was when you were born, it's kind of like a birthday. The birthday is nothing more than when the sun returns back to the place it was the moment you took your first breath. That's a solar return. But you also have a lunar return. And so that unlocks the blueprint of your entire chart. And so women month by month can look at their lunar returns to see where they're at, what their cycle's all about, what this cycle's all about for them. And it's almost like their new moon and full moon rolled up in one. And so from a fertility perspective, and I don't work with women specifically on fertility, so I don't have a ton of research in this from my own practice and experience, but there's a lot of theory around that moment of the lunar return is the most fertile time of the month for that particular woman. So that's something to play with for sure.
Yeah, so interesting. I think it's great because I do work with a lot of women for fertility, and I think it's particularly interesting and getting women to just be aware that there is this other potential time that they may be fertile, I think is really important.
Yeah, and it is fertile. It's like, your birthday. When you have your birthday, it's a time. It's a time to we blow out the candles and we have a wish. And truly, so every month we have that with ourselves. And if your wish is to get pregnant, it's worthy of experimenting with that for sure.
And if your wish is not to get pregnant, you might want to do the same.
Exactly.
No kidding.
I work with women on lots of wishes.
I feel like that's not been explored. Oh, sorry, Jen. What were you saying?
Oh, no. You're right. It hasn't been explored. Not a ton.
Yeah.
No,
Nat, I mean, you don't know there isn't really any science on it, is there? I mean, it's just, I feel like there's a lot of hearsay.
Yeah, there's a lot of theory on it. I was really upset when, not really upset, but when we were trying to conceive Geordie, I'm like, right, I'm putting this theory to the test. And then that inner control freak of me came out. I'm like, nah, mate, I'm not waiting. Let's just fall pregnant this month because, if I fall pregnant this month and he's born in summer and, I had it all worked out. But, we could test the theory one day, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, the other way to test it. The other way to test it is, and maybe I'll run this test with some of my clients, is to just find out when they're menstruating in relationship to when their lunar return is, and just to start to see if it makes sense that they would also be ovulating in relationship to that.
How does that work?
So you just find out when their lunar return would be, and find out when their last period was, and start to clock it.
And what effect will that have on the period?
No, nothing. It's just to find out, is it in relationship to the moon? Just to start to gather
because
data.
My understanding was that it's a second chance of ovulation.
That's interesting. That there's a second chance of ovulation.
Yeah, like some people call it an escape ovulation, but my understanding was that if a woman climaxed during her time of lunar return, that she would ovulate. That's my understanding.
That's so fascinating. Yeah. I don't have a period. That's part of my story. So I haven't played with this at all on my own. But I think that's a wonderful question worth a peer study group. Maybe I'll get it together.
Yeah. Yeah, I've written about it before.
I know, because
and
that's what I'm saying.
As much. Yeah, I know it's slightly off topic.
There's no real studies on this.
Yeah. No, I know. And, I would love for more information on that because it's just, I find it wildly fascinating. But anyway, we need to keep on moving because we've got so much good stuff to get to. So can can we explore the idea of why couple, like why we should be considering, linking up science with actually our spirituality and how that's part of the healing process?
Yeah, I love that. So, I mean, it's even piggybacks off of what Nicole was saying, that there's not a ton of research on this. It's interesting because I'm a science gal. I really love science. And then I found there's so many different roads to me getting to where I am today. But suffice it to say, like, I didn't set out to do what I'm doing at all. It's like this path found me. And at the same time, having a very science mind and a very spiritually driven soul, I have done so much research on all of my astrological chart to see when that happens, does that happen, does that happen, does that happen, does that happen? And that's why, it's interesting answering this question around lunar returns, because I just don't have a period, so I don't know that answer. But point is that why should we marry science and spirituality? And it's just, it's interesting. In my own life, I found that science was half the story. In my own journey towards healing, I had cancer, gynecological cancer, as a teenager, 18 and 19. I was launched into menopause by 19 due to some really radical Western medicine interventions that did indeed save my life, so I can't complain, but simultaneously really jolted my body in directions that were almost impossible to recover from. And, I went from doctor to doctor, scientific study to scientific study, really researching things, and none of it ever gave me any real healing, to be totally honest. There was interventions, but there wasn't any real necessary soul healing or, whatever, just helping me really recover from what I went through. And it wasn't until I started cueing into my own spirituality, my intuition, first and foremost, being the number one thing, and then learning things like how to follow the lunar cycle and things that at the time, 15, 16 years ago were just so far out there. There was no Instagram talking about this. The secret hadn't been written. There was no one to look to in the community that was doing any of this, and I was just out on my own, and it felt so weird. It was so weird socially, and it was so not in alignment with what, my Ivy League doctors would at all even consider talking to me about. But what I learned through the process is that we can't quantify our intuition, and as a matter of fact, intuition is just completely opposite of something that's logical and able to be reasoned or measured and tested. It's not meant to be in that box at all. And so what I've come to realize in my own healing journey and when I talk to so many other women about is, let's have science. Let's know the facts. Let's know the best research. Let's know the most up-to-date information, and let's look at it in a really smart way where we're being discerning around what we take in and actually being critical in how we perceive things and being really smart about the decisions we make based on evidence, and then simultaneously take a massive leap of faith and trust ourselves, and actually trust ourselves first. And when we can learn to trust ourselves first by learning how to really be ourselves, listening to our inner voice, trusting our intuition, trusting our guidance systems, I actually believe I've come to learn that I have a system of guides that are invisible and with me at all times, informing me how to move forward in my life, which is how the hell do you prove that? You don't, except through experience, right? And I marry that with some really practical nuts and bolts from multiple disciplines, the positive psychology discipline, integrative wellness, women's health, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just, for me, has been game-changing, and for so many of my clients as well. So I think that we have both. We have logic, we have reason, we have a scientific brain, and we also have our intuition and our inner voice and our spirituality, much like we have a left brain and a right brain, much like we have a sun and a moon.
I'm really curious about the Lunar Logic Revolution and how you coined that and why you feel so strongly that this movement's so important.
Yeah, so just perfect question based on the last question as well, because it's about lunar and it's about logic, right? I find so many women are either they fear that if they go down the spirituality path that they're going to be really down the woo-woo train, and abandon.
Someone called it boo-boo to me yesterday. Well, that's boo-boo. I'm I think it might be woo-woo. But anyway, that's okay. Whatever.
Yeah, you go down that path, you're just you're just in an alternate reality. Or if you're the type of person who wants to see if things are researched and documented and proven, that there's no space in your life for the more intuitive alternative. And I just think that that's ridiculous. There's a sun and a moon. There's polarity and throughout the entire universe, and it's how our universe works. So why wouldn't we as women learn to love the polarity within ourselves and learn to reconcile that yes, we're going to have a follicular phase and we're going to have a luteal phase. We're going to have a time when we're ramping up and we're really aggressive and assertive and using our voice. Then we're going to have a time when we probably don't want to talk to anyone and just want to hang out at home in our PJs comfortable. It's the same thing with ourselves, right? We have a very pragmatic approach to life and then simultaneously a very nonlinear way of looking at things too. And the more that we can embrace that and reconcile that, the less we feel divided, the more that we're integrated, and the more that we can bring our full potential into the world and thrive in business or thrive in whatever dimension of life we want to thrive in without compromising our femininity, our sense of well-being, our sexuality, or any of the other values we may hold as women.
Yeah,
that's so beautiful.
I love that. And that kind of connects into what we were talking about, or I know you're going to talk about as well, is that mind-body connection, right? What is, if someone was like, well, what is that? What is that? Like, what is that? Come on.
Yeah, what does that actually mean, Nicole?
What does it mean?
I hear that often.
People say it all the time. I'm like, do yoga is a real mind-body connection. Like, what does that mean?
What does the mind-body connection mean? It is a great question. I think the mind-body connection is just nothing more than our thoughts influence our biology, and our biology influences how we see and how we think. It's like interesting. I just came back from Bali last week. Was it last week? And I had this amazing body work where this guy was basically literally walked on me and then flipped me over and started doing this psoas muscle massage, and I started crying hysterically. It was so painful. And he's like, yeah, that's where you're tight. That's where you have to let go. That's where you're holding on. And it was so painful. And he's like, you just have to cry this one out, basically. And I'm like, oh, here's a reminder of that mind-body connection. And it's this fact that our emotions live in our body, whether or not they've been felt, whether or not they've been released, they're in there somewhere affecting our biology. In my particular situation, I had cancer at a really young age, but I also had a very assaulting approach to my own body, an assaulting approach to my own femininity from a really young age. And I used to actually pray that I wouldn't be able to have kids. And I used to, I was depressed. There were things happening in my life that needed to be addressed and handled. But as a consequence, I would hold my hands over my stomach and pray that I couldn't have children. And I was not in a healthy state, to say the least. But my body actually manifested that as a gigantic tumor the size of a bowling ball that erupted and took out a whole ovary. And so in my own life, I often you saw
hear that. So often you hear stories, exactly like you said, that was possibly your wake-up call. I don't know when everyone seems to have a turning point, and that, and then there's many more to come. But it's so common that, when there is this type of thought process that, of course we manifest and we create more of whatever it is that we're focusing on. So if it's that we don't love our femininity and, that we do hate on that part of our body and our reproductive organs, so often things manifest there. And I think that can be enlightening to some people and actually really quite painful for some people to hear as well, because, there's that automatic, what do you mean I'm doing this to myself, And that's what you're talking about, that connection. But that happens so often. I've had people say, how dare you accuse me that my thoughts and my feelings about myself is making me sick.
I have strong feelings about that, though, too, because I also feel like we don't want to shame ourselves for what we go through physically, and that we can't. We can't do that to ourselves, and it's not always real, right? There is a mind-body connection, and I don't ever want to underestimate it. But at the other end of the spectrum, there's also disease and illness, and we're just fragile as human beings. And if we can catch a cold, and it doesn't mean that we're really feeling bad about ourselves and got so much to work on. if we catch a cold and we know that it's connected to the fact that we just stayed up 3 days all night working on a project because we wanted to prove our worth, and underneath that is shame because we don't think we're worthy enough, and this is a pattern, then yeah, let's look at that for sure. But at the same time, if it doesn't ring true, it doesn't ring true, and it doesn't always have to ring true.
Yep, that's a good point too. I think that it is interesting though, because it's always good to bring awareness to the role that your emotions play in physical illness. And I think in a lot of cases, people are just in denial about it. And you're right, maybe it doesn't ring true for everyone, and that's totally fine too. But in many cases with my clients, I've seen it. I can see it, and it's a matter of bringing them potentially around to the idea to start working on a deeper level.
Beautiful. It's so needed.
What about? Yes, yeah. I mean, it is. Tell me about creating healing rituals in your life. How do women do that? I know you're like the queen of rituals, Jen. And so I'm really curious to hear what you have to share about that.
Well, I think everything, I always say success is knowing who you are and being who you are. And that just applies to everything. Like if you want to have a great relationship, success for you in career, it's like let's just figure out what makes you tick first. And I guess this even goes back to how do you know if it's mind, body, or just illness. It's like you have to really be willing to investigate who you are. And so to just put that theme into how do you create a healing ritual, it's just like what makes you tick? And first of all, what's a ritual? A ritual is a behavior or pattern that happens without almost it's like an unconscious habit at some point. It becomes ritualistic, right? And so I work with the lunar phases in a very ritualistic way. At this point, like when it's new, my body does a certain thing, my mind goes a certain place, I have certain spiritual disciplines that I practice. Now that we're in the moment right now where we're moving towards a full moon, I have a particular way of being in the world. I've practiced this for so long. These are my rituals. This is my way of being. But when you're first getting started, it actually does take effort to create rituals. And I would say the first step to creating a ritual is just to know what your intention is for the ritual. How do you want this ritual to serve you? What do you look forward to in your own life? So a ritual could be a hot bath at the end of the day, if that's your thing, like a way to unwind. It could be a hot bath one time a month at a certain day of your cycle or a certain point of your cycle. It could involve like classic rituals in the like feminine spirituality way. There's all sorts of things you could do. You could create an altar. You can honor the directions and the elements. You can honor a particular deity that means something to you, maybe a Hindu deity or Christian deity, and call in like sacred space, which is a time to commune with your heart and your souls, almost in a transpersonal sense, and then from there enter into your higher self or an altered state of being that allows you access to different channels within yourself. And that's a way of relating to life in the field of potentiality in yourself that's really sacred and special, hence a ritual, right? But then there's also just like the rituals of how you have your tea in the morning, or the rituals around the holidays. What do you like to do for certain holidays? Are there things that you do? And so it's just honoring time in a distinct way that you want to repeat year after year or day after day or however long you want the ritual to last in your life, so that it brings you back to center without you having to rethink it every time. Does that make sense? I know I just said a lot.
Yeah, totally. No, totally. I think what a lot of people get hung up on is the inability to, or, some people are like, yes, I'd love to do that, but, I've got 3 kids and blah, blah, blah. I get that feedback all the time. And it's not, I guess the message is that, you want to try and implement it as regularly as you can, depending on the circumstances, but not put unnecessary pressure on yourself at the same time.
No, the way rituals work best is when they actually become unconscious. Like, so you don't actually have to think about it anymore. Like, most people have rituals every single minute of every single day because we're mostly habits, right?
Well, and whether it's moving in the right direction or the wrong direction, they might not even be aware.
100%. So when you can bring that to their attention, it's like, well, actually, you're doing rituals every day. Did you have coffee this morning? Did you brush your teeth? Did you call your best friend on the way to work like you do every day? Those are rituals. And so it's just bringing more consciousness to our habits. I mean, it's uncomfortable because it's changed, too. But that's really all it is being mindful of what your habits are. And then bringing more intention. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. As per usual, we're out of time. We always manage to, run out. But where can women find you? Because I'm sure, Jen, a lot of our listeners would love to connect with you. So would you like to let them know before we go where they can do that, please?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm on the web. It's my name, Jennifer, last name Racioppi. .com, so www.jenniferracioppi, Racioppi.com. And, I would love for your listeners to come check me out. I write a blog, and I have a little free downloadable ebook on how to have rituals with the 4 phases of the moon and how to unlock your powers through understanding more about your astrological sign and just guidance in general.
So awesome, and so much for everybody. Thank you, everyone that's joined in today and listened. We're back. I think we're back next week, aren't we, Nicole, with Katie?
We are.
Is that right? Yeah. We'll be back same time next week. But until then, everyone have a fabulous day, fabulous night, wherever you are in the world. And thanks again, Jen, for joining us. And we'll see everyone we'll hear everyone next time, won't we? We won't see them.
Yeah, thanks, exactly. Guys. We'll hear everyone. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you both so much. Such a joy.
Bye.
Thank you.